Hi! This time I wanted to demystify Gary Gygax in tabletop role-playing games. There are many lies and falsehoods concerning Gary Gygax and his understanding of tabletop role-playing games. He was never a role-player. But first, let's talk about some positive things concerning Gary Gygax. He was a visionary and a salesman. He had this vision of selling Dungeons and Dragons. He took a gamble, a huge gamble. It was Gary Gygax, Don Kay, and Brian Bloom who put a huge sum of money to produce that initial print run of Dungeons and Dragons. They actually had to store the unassembled packages on their own houses. I don't remember if it was Gary Gygax's pantry or it was Don Kay's pantry, perhaps, but they had all of the boxes for Dungeons and Dragons without assembling them, stored there without the labels, they had to package all of it on their own because they had no money to hire people to do that. In the case of Brian Bloom, he was a bit more wealthy when compared to Don and Gary, but in the case of Gary, he had that huge family to maintain. If the gamble didn't pay off, it was game over for them. But it paid off, luckily. Gary Gygax was also a wargamer and a board gamer. But he was never a role player. The one who created Dungeons and Dragons as a tabletop role-playing game was Dave Arneson. Dave Arneson took the chainmail skeleton provided by Gary Gygax and he created Blackmoor, which could be considered the prototype, the true prototype or proto-version of Dungeons and Dragons. The leveling up system, going into dungeons, killing monsters, taking their stuff, political intrigues, repercussions when it comes to interacting with non-player characters. The things that some of the characters did during the Blackmoor campaign, it pretty much got them expelled from Castle Blackmoor because of their selfishness. Oftentimes, the players also played as the enemies. You could say that it was also the birth of competitive role-playing. But when Dave Arneson brought Blackmoor, when he visited Gary Gygax and ran a game for Gary and his son Rob Kuntz, I think there were a couple of other people involved. He was the original, the first dungeon master. But Gary and Rob Kuntz never understood what made Dave Arneson's way of running things magical. And it was roleplay, because through roleplay, you achieve immersion. Please check out the various links in the description. If you don't know what roleplay is all about, please check them out. The first time that Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz tried to recreate the way that Dave Arneson ran things, it was a complete disaster. There is a video here in YouTube, I think it's still available. It's called something like Conversations with Rob Kuntz. Definitely look for it. Obviously, Rob Kuntz being Gary Gygax's adoptive son, he's going to sugarcoat many things, but it's still valuable in my opinion. When Gary Gygax finally gave structure to the game and played with Rob Kuntz, of course, but also with his children, with his friends, he never achieved roleplay. As I mentioned in a previous video about the tabletop RPG community, I'm going to put the link to that in the description. Gary Gygax never wrote a single book explaining roleplaying or roleplay. Even those books that were titled Role-Playing Mastery or something, they never had information on how to stay in character, how not to ask questions to the dungeon master because the dungeon master doesn't exist in the game world. All information should be gathered through roleplay. He never explained that. He never explained that the game master shouldn't be constantly asking the players, what do you do? What are your plans? What do you intend to do? Are you going to do this? A complete, total absence of roleplay and of course, no immersion whatsoever. Gary Gygax was also perhaps the first fudger of dice. Sir Rablar, and it's pronounced like that, Rablar. Even though it's written Rablar, it's Rablar. Sir Rablar is perhaps one of the most famous, if not the most famous character in Gary's campaign. He was Rob Kuhn's character, of course, Rablar. And if you take a look at those sessions, look through the different historical documents, look through the Dragon's Foot forums, the Dragon magazines, he was always saving Rablar's hide by fudging the dice or coming up with some way to rescue him. I have mentioned this before, I think in another video. There was this level under Castle Greyhawk that was infested with wights, and Rablar went down solo. Rablar was constantly going solo in a Dungeons and Dragons game. That just gives it away that he was constantly being saved by Gary. I am not saying that Rob Kuhn's skill was non-existent when it comes to navigating dangerous environments, but you can tell that Gary was pretty easy in some situations. He was going easy on him. He was cornered by a wight. He had already been wounded. The wight, it was looking quite dire for him, but they were playing quite late at night and they were making a lot of noise. And suddenly Gary's wife came in and she got really mad because of all of the noise that they were making. It was pretty late. She wanted to sleep. She went back to bed and Gary was like, make a roll. And Rob Kuhns made a roll. He was still in the middle of the fight against the wight. Who knows what he rolled, and Gary was like, oh, the result means that it was all a dream. Your character is alive and safe. Gary Gygax did so many things wrong for the tabletop RPG hobby, truly. The positive thing is that Gary managed to take all of the chaotic notes and ideas from Dave Arneson and reconfigure them or build them into a workable gaming structure that I still love today. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love the swinginess of the D20. I love the armor class, the Bansian spells. I love all of it. The lore, the different settings. I love it. I will keep on playing Dungeons and Dragons. I love it so much. But you should play Dungeons and Dragons the way that it was originally intended. In the Dave Arneson way. Staying in character. Immersion. I have mentioned this before as well. One of the more famous attempts of Dave of creating that immersion where his players stood up and he took them to a dark area in his basement and then he yelled at the top of his lungs so that they would get startled. They shifted their position and that's how they started the fight, because it represents how the characters got scared because of the threat that they were facing off against. He was always applying things, giving priority to the roleplay. He didn't stick to a single mechanic in particular situations. If the players attempted something, if their characters attempted something, he would come up with something on the fly. It's about, like they say, rulings, not rules. The rules are there to help you, to support you. But roleplay should be given the priority. He prioritized the actions, the roleplay, the description of the character's actions. So yes, I just wanted to clear that out. I think it's the fault of many people that Gary Gygax is presented as the be-all, end-all of role-playing. He's presented as this master of role-playing. He knew squat. He didn't know anything about role-playing. This is because of one of my viewers commented on that. He just commented that it was Rob Necronomicon. He said it's probably part of the influencer's fault. If you're someone running a business like Wizards of the Coast, in that time, TSR, the influencers on YouTube that are not role players, they are businessmen and businesswomen. They are there to sell things to you. So if they say something like Gary Gygax didn't know how to roleplay, well, first of all, They probably don't know. They are probably in complete ignorance of roleplay. But even if they knew how to roleplay, it's not in their interest to mention that, because then you start to think, if Gary Gygax isn't like the greatest representative of tabletop role-playing games, maybe I should be playing something else, you see? But if someone loves Dungeons and Dragons like me, you're going to keep on playing. Nonsensical. But like I said, from a business perspective, they are all about the money. Imagine if Wizards of the Coast said something like, Gary Gygax didn't know how to roleplay. The moniker on the cover of the books, like the world's greatest role-playing game. Many people would feel, many newcomers, specifically newcomers to the hobby, would feel disillusioned. Their image of Gary Gygax would be shattered. But yes, this is my attempt to provide some information. This information, of course, will reach those that are of critical minds, intelligent, because there are Gygaxian cults out there, mostly driven by that greed, or maybe, for example, if a YouTuber is completely focused on the Gygaxian way, that is without roleplay, and he brings forth these things, the audience may even abandon the channel altogether. So they need to keep that lie up, that falsehood. Well, thank you for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. And remember, it is better to roleplay and fail in character than not to roleplay and fail as a player. Once again, thank you. And see you later.